becoming expert at these things right now, right? You are able to hear me?
Yes.
All of the functionality, but what I am hearing is that we're getting really tired of being a square on a screen. So we wanted to make it as interactive as possible, and I would encourage you to ask questions and not let me speak at you, but as I speak, raise your hand, wave your hands around. Heather will help stop me so I can answer any questions that you might have, either by waving your hand or unmuting or writing in the chat box. So I'm always very excited to speak about government affairs. It is a passion of mine as CEO of APWA. I have a lot of other roles, but this is a role I like a lot. And we have an office in Washington, DC as well, with about 8 staff, and they handle a lot of our work. And I spend about a week there every month when we were able to fly around the world, right? So anyway, I'll give you an overview of what the aspects that you should be thinking about. Either if you're managing a program like this, or if you want to start one, and what all of the elements are. So as I stated, I want to make it as interactive as possible. If the technology works, I'm going to have you in breakout rooms for a couple of minutes. But I'm going to start with a video, and let's see if this all works. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment and get you started here.
Woo, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington.
Yeah, there's the audio.
Well,
working.
I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday.
All right, Scott, we lost you there.
Right. I didn't know if you're able to hear and
Yes,
see it or not. I can't see all of you when I have that up. It's working though?
It is working,
Okay.
correct.
All right, we will go back there again then.
Just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a...
So that was a flavor of what actually happens, and I don't know how many of you ever actually watched that, but I believe I was about 13 years old when that came out, and I said, "This is really cool stuff," and that's how I ended up in government affairs. So let me get started with my slides. Come got to share screen again. Okay. Okay, there we are. And trying to get everybody up on the screen. Anyway, because I can't see anybody when I have my slides up. Heather, is there a way to make that happen?
I think if you exit the full screen under more there, if you go to more on your screen there and exit the full screen, there should be some type of like a video pop out.
Breakout rooms. Well,
Show video panel.
that's okay.
Or under view options.
There we go. I got it. Thank you. All right. I like being able to see everybody. Okay, so let's get started. So why do we even think about having a government affairs program? I have a list of items here that speak to some of the reasons that associations have these kinds of programs or even start them. You know, the first item speaks about being the voice of your constituency to people who are making policies. And then the other one is if you can show your members that you're really engaged with policymakers that are making policies that will impact their lives, careers, and constituencies, that helps a lot as well. And then there's also a whole host of other issues. Most of us that have associations have members who are experts in a whole host of areas. And believe it or not, members of Congress and their staff can't know everything. And so it's really important that nonprofit groups like ours can bring members and speak with members of Congress and staff. So there's a lot of different kinds of government affairs programs. You can have them at the international level and work, for instance, with the EU over in Europe if there are policy issues that might impact your group and your members as well. Federal, you probably are aware that we have 3 branches of government that we work with actually. So the executive branch is the White House and all of its various agencies. We work with many of the agencies like EPA and Homeland, whole host of others. The legislative branch is focused on the US Congress when we're speaking about federal, and then judicial, not a lot of associations actually interact with that. Those are the courts. Where I work last, we actually would interact with them, and we wrote something which is called an amicus brief, which weighs in with our experts on a legal issue. State, so there are a lot of associations in the United States that have a pretty active state government affairs program, but it's not easy. There's 50 states and there's other territories as well. So you need a lot of resources and you need a lot of staff as well to try to follow every state, and what's happening is not easy. We often engage our members who live all over the United States, and they let us know what's happening in their state. And I'll speak more about those efforts. And then local, a lot of policies and ordinances are made at the local levels. I mean, for instance, with our stay-at-home, a lot of those initial ordinances were implemented at the local, not federally or even state. So that's important too. As far as who we are, so we've got over 30,000 members in the United States and Canada. We're the only group out there that really speaks about all aspects of public works and infrastructure, which we'll speak about more, and how we think we influence U.S. Congress on these issues. And we also make a real effort at making sure our members understand that they can and should have a voice with the U.S. Congress. I'll speak a little more later about each of the roles each of these groups play: our board, Government Affairs Committee, our staff, and then, as I mentioned, we have members that live all over the United States. So how should one start? It's really important, especially when you're establishing, or even if you have a government affairs program, that you have a really good structure. What I've found over years of working in the association world is that boards of directors don't really understand government affairs or advocacy, or even why we should have a program. And that's often the first program to either be overlooked, ignored, or cut out. We established a good structure with our new strategic plan, which was approved recently. If you look at the second item on there, voice. So we've established these major headings, and that's how we align all of our work. But that item called voice speaks to be the voice of public works to government leaders, the public, and media. Once we have that in our strategic plan, it's very challenging for a board member to say, you know, that this is a waste of time. I don't understand it. Why are we even in this? So we have a board-approved strategic plan. Next in line, which we had not had, and when I started working with APWA, I was really surprised that we had no structure. So we implemented a structure. What you see up here on your screen here is called Legislative Priorities and Policy Statements for the 116th Congress. So every 2 years, there's a new Congress, and every 2 years, we create these public policy priorities. Now, the reality, as you can see up on the screen, we have 3 areas. We look at what's happening with roads and bridges, we look at water, and we look at issues of emergency management. Our members work in all of those areas, and what happens in the U.S. Congress has a direct and important impact. So that's what we establish as our framework. And we create bullets here that speak to different issues under each of those major headings. And this, if and when it's approved by our board of directors, it then enables and allows our staff in Washington to lobby, and we'll speak about that bad word in a moment. So this really lays out your structure. So before, I'm going to stop sharing a minute so I can get to breakout rooms. I'll go back again. So anyway, can nonprofit associations lobby? I will put you in random breakout rooms per moment, and I'd like you to discuss for a couple of minutes whether or not you believe that nonprofits can lobby. Any questions before you move in the ether? Okay, I'm gonna put you in some rooms. Here goes, and we'll bring you back shortly. There's still a few left here. Let's see, which room is this? Celeste.
You're still in the main
Yep.
area. There we go. Usually,
Yeah, I've got Lessa, Celeste, Mike is still there, and Curtis. So we might as well chat here. Can nonprofits lobby? What do you think?
Yes.
I have a yes.
Yeah.
a nonprofit or a not-for-profit?
Same kind of thing. A group that has an IRS nonprofit status.
Depends on if you're a 3 or a 6, right?
Are you a 3, Scott, in your scenario? A 6, a 4?
All good questions. I won't give you the answers yet. Just have a slide on that.
You asked the wrong group that question.
It's fine. Yeah, you'll see. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and it is a question on the CAE exam.
Question on the CAE, I was going to say.
Yeah, it is. So, okay, I'm going to bring back everybody. Give them one minute, and we'll bring them back. Just watching my time here. They will start coming back. Heather, it worked well.
Yes,
Turned it over to me. It's fine.
Yeah.
All breakout rooms will close in 37 seconds. I see people coming back. Hi. "26 seconds. I think when you're in the breakout room, you can leave on your own if you want, but then automatically it brings people back. 9 seconds. Everybody should be back. Okay, all breakout rooms are closed. Okay, everybody should be back right now. If you want to share what your group's thoughts were, unmute and start speaking. I'll find you on
Hey,
my
Scott.
screens here.
Hey, Scott,
Hi,
this is
Christine.
Christine. How are you?
Hi, Christine. Christine
Hi,
works
Scott.
for the APWA. Hi. What did your group talk about?
We talked about if it was possible for nonprofits to lobby. I didn't answer at first. I just let them answer.
Yeah.
And then we came to the conclusion, yes, it depends on the tax exempt and also what they are lobbying for.
Great answer. Okay. Others who want to speak up? And anyone who said no, it's not ever possible? One more group before we roll on. Just have to unmute. Oh, come on.
Is it also dependent on the tax status, 501, like the C4, if their education or not, depending if their education or not, that they can actually lobby. I think it depends on the tax status.
Exactly. So great responses. I'm going to share my screen again, come back to the slides. And you said, I like seeing people. I got it again. Great. Okay. So can nonprofit, and we had some questions about, is there a difference, not-for-profit, non-profit? Those words are actually used interchangeably. What is ultimately important is the IRS status. Okay. So here are your rules. So if you're a 501c3, we'll start here, okay? You can lobby. Now there's a lot of misinformation about the difference in words with advocacy and lobbying. People don't like saying the word lobbying. It really is the same thing, but we'll speak more about the differences about what's permitted. So if you're a 501c3, you can what's called lobby an insubstantial amount. And the IRS has created some forms that allow you to calculate what insubstantial means. Congress nor the IRS ever define what insubstantial actually means, which when they created the law in 1990 about reporting and all of that, it was very unclear, and a lot of us were worried. Basically, if you have a $1 million budget, for instance, they give you a maximum dollar amount that you can spend on lobbying, but not all activities are actually lobbying, and I'll speak about that in a moment. What 501c3s can't do is you can't create a political campaign, you can't support people running for offices either. Whereas a 501c6 allows you to lobby an unlimited amount, and you can also create a political action committee and raise money for people who run. But if you're a 501c6 and do lobby, you have to deduct a portion and let your members know exactly how much you're spending on that. Whereas a 501c3, we don't have that extra reporting step to the members, because the IRS says if you're just lobbying an insubstantial amount, you're fine. Any questions about that? I know it's complex, but most people who work in this world, and I've spoken with CEOs a lot, is, oh, no, I'm a 501c3, I can't. Well, you really can, but you have to know what your rules are. Questions about that before I move on? Okay. So when we're reporting, what we care most about is understanding the differences. We've got direct lobbying, grassroots lobbying, and direct lobbying is when you meet with a Capitol Hill staffer, a member of Congress, and try to influence a specific piece of legislation or a concept for creating a piece of legislation. Grassroots lobbying is really when you organize your group, your members around an issue. And I'll speak more about that later, but we have, as I mentioned, a government affairs staff that flies around the United States and meets at our chapter meetings, and really doesn't urge them to lobby on any specific issue at the start. We really give them skills and have them understand that it is your right. Before I speak about what your rights are, though, here are the kinds of activities that we engage in. I mentioned earlier that we've chosen to put our resources at the federal level rather than state, local. We do a little work up in Canada, so one might say it's international. We follow what's happening with bills. You saw our Schoolhouse Rock friend, and then also regulations as well. So a regulation will come out of a federal agency. So for instance, EPA will issue a proposed regulation, and then you can comment, and anyone is able to write in and say, I like it, I don't like it, here's why. Regulations are often overlooked, but they have such great impact on all of our lives without us even realizing it. And in some instances, well, a lot actually, when a bill is passed, it often in that bill says, okay, agency X, we've written the law, but now we need you to create the rules by which the US population will adhere to. And those rules are what's also called regulation. we write letters, we have testimony, we track what's happening at hearings, and I'll speak more about that. And then this other bullet about how we reach out, and then working with other like-minded coalitions. So before we start that, I'm going to have one more breakout room for you to discuss, is lobbying a dirty word? I'm going to stop sharing, come back, and put you in breakout rooms for 1 minute and bring you back.
I'll tell you what, before taking the CAE,
Yeah.
I thought that lobbying was a dirty word.
Well,
But I know
I've
different.
spoken with lots of people who have earned their CAEs and still think it's a dirty word.
I think it depends on how
No.
successful you are. If you're out there affecting legislature all the time, people are going to have maybe a dirtier view of your politics. But if you're just out there trying really hard but don't really affect anything, they're like, yeah, you keep trying.
Have you ever seen it was Thank You for Not Smoking? It was all
No.
about this
That's fabulous movie.
lobbyist. Yes. So every time you say lobbyist, that's what I think of. And they're like their little club where it was like the guns and the nuclear weapons. And
Those people are dirty lobbyists, right? We're not. We're not. We're promoting education. No, that's a great example. They are a hardcore that give the rest of us a bad name.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring back people. I think I've got about, let's see.
I think you get advocacy and lobbying get crossed off or get crossed up.
Well, you know, I was commenting on that it is kind of a misnomer. It's the same thing. It's a nicer way to say lobbying that makes some of us feel happier and less or more clean. We advocate, but it's still the same thing. And I'm just waiting. Rooms will close in 22 seconds. Bring me back, people.
We're not big talkers in my group, so we come back early.
Oh, okay. Well, you are, Tracy. Come on.
That's true. I did do most of the talking. You had me pegged right, Scott.
Tracy, does that mean you'll be representing us in this conversation this time?
Perfect. Go for it, Tracy.
Are you ready for me to start, or do you want me to wait?
Please do. No. Everybody's back, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, our general consensus was it depends if they're lobbying on something you agree with or if it's something you don't agree with. If it's something you don't agree with, then you're like, oh, those dirty, nasty lobbyists up there trying to influence our government. And if they're lobbying for something you agree with, you're like, yeah, go get them. You know. So it depends. It depends what they're lobbying about.
That's a great response, and in my group we were kind of saying the same thing. Heather spoke about a great documentary-ish movie about lobbying on the tobacco industry, and I said, yeah, those might be the dirty lobbyists, but others. One more group who hasn't spoken yet. Oh, I'm sure you have opinions on this. Everybody has opinions on this. Who's going to be the brave soul? Did anyone say it was a great thing? Nobody.
My group kind of agreed that it was mutual, like it's a good thing. And sometimes maybe just instead of using the word lobbyist, Brian, I think you used advocacy.
Great.
So
Yeah, we
yeah.
we speak a lot about that, and you're right. It's really the same word, but advocacy makes people feel better. It's more educational. So let's look at this next one. So basically, all it means is you try to influence the votes of members of a legislative body, state or federal or local. I noticed in the chat box, one person has an active state program, and they wanted us, to speak more about that, which I can and will. And then it's also our constitutional right. When we speak with our members who work in public works, and a lot of them are public works directors, they are very nervous because they are at council meetings, they interact with their mayor, they interact with their elected leaders, and they're worried about getting out ahead of them if they lobby, if they advocate on behalf of public works and infrastructure. And we say, look, more than likely, you will be in alignment. Most cities want funding for infrastructure projects, and that's largely what we speak about, or regulations on environmental issues and what that looks like. So it's everybody's right, and all it means is you're influencing. Where I think we've gone astray is that there are those lobbyists who bring big suitcases of small unmarked bills and say, here's all this money, we want to influence you. For us, all of us at this conference right now, it's not about that. And you could, if you're a 501c6, but especially if you're a 501c3 like we are, you're not allowed to. So we just focus on bringing people up and telling our story, which I will speak more about. So you want to have a presence up on Capitol Hill, and this is a picture in the upper left of our board of directors, and the woman, I don't know if you see my mouse moving here. So this woman here with the glasses on her head, what was Mitch McConnell's right hand person. She brought us up in the gallery there. We walked on the Senate floor, but we're constantly speaking about public works and our 30,000 members around the United States and Canada, and how they're constantly making efforts in improving the quality of life. Some of you may recognize Sharice Davids. You may live in her district. She's part of Kansas City, Leawood, Overland Park area. We meet with her a lot. She's actually on one of the committees that has impact on infrastructure issues. So then let's move on here. So then we also, our staff is constantly meeting with Hill staff and saying, hey, we can bring you a story. We've got experts in these issues. The man in the white hair is our president right now. And so we wrote testimony for him to speak about at the hearing. We try to find people who will speak, who have their own stories. And I mean, this is great if you can bring somebody up there and speak. This is at the U.S. House. We also helped start in the House a caucus. There's lots of caucuses there. There's the Stand on Your Head on Wednesday. There's snack eating ones. There's these just random ones that don't actually do a lot, but are namesake only. So we said, if we help establish one, and keep in mind, outside groups can't establish one, but you can work with Hill staff and members of Congress who can establish them. So we helped establish the House Caucus on Public Works and Infrastructure. we use this and hold Hill briefings. The audience here is made up of Hill staff and members of Congress, and we're speaking about water issues and the importance of funding clean water projects, wastewater, and so we hold about 4 of these briefings a year. So we organize them, we bring in our experts, and we speak to a lot of Hill staff and members of Congress in a room all at once. But that's pretty unique and has worked extremely well. We also use National Public Works Week, which we've had for about 58 years. It's the 3rd week in May, and I would highly recommend you create a National Blank Week, because what happens is that gets you a lot of hoopla on the Hill. Let me just skip ahead a moment. So, for instance, we've had the Senate every year create a Senate resolution recognizing APWA and all of its members in the United States whose mission is to help improve the quality of life of all. Real fast though, back here, this was a briefing. We brought in public works directors from all over the United States, of cities and counties with populations of over 500,000. So New York, LA County, Phoenix, Atlanta. That brings a lot of weight and a lot of influence. We also, right outside of the Capitol, as part of National Public Works Week, stage creative ways of getting in front of Hill staff and members of Congress. We have Washington, D.C. Public Works Department drove up in their big trucks, parked right outside there, and then we had donuts and coffee, and we would basically trip people as they're walking, say, wait, stop, we want to speak with you, or stand in their way. And they're like, why? And we speak about public works in that way. And it's amazing, right on the street, we're exchanging business cards. We even received so much recognition for the work that we were doing in the area of infrastructure that we've now had 2 meetings at the White House. Sorry, we haven't helped approve funding for the infrastructure, but we are working on that as well. You see the people around the table there, they are the public works directors from major cities around the United States. The value here is that we can show these public works directors who have a lot of their staff join APWA, that we have this level of access with the White House, the Hill, but then we can also show the White House and members of Congress that we have access to the leaders in the United States, the ones actually building and creating the infrastructure in America. Questions on any of that? Okay, a lot of larger groups have what's called fly-ins, where they actually pay to fly their members in, and they have a whole day up on Capitol Hill. And there are groups that have hundreds of people in. That's expensive, but this group I have in the picture here is actually our Government Affairs Committee that helps write our public policy statements I showed earlier. So we bring them in once a year, they meet, they do their work, but then we bring them up on the Hill. And we meet with high-ranking executive branch people, as well as Hill staff and members of Congress. These are our experts. So I spoke about international. We have members up in Canada as well, and we hire a lobbyist up there. I know one person on this conference said they have a hired lobbyist at the state capital, that happens a lot, and a lot of you are able to hire a person at the state, person in Washington. It so happens that we're fortunate enough to be able to have our own staff. That's my preference because you can really bring so much more of your flavor. So we hire a lobbyist up in Ottawa. The woman here, though, is on our staff in Washington, and she handles advocacy up there. The man in the middle was the Minister of Infrastructure up there, the highest ranking person who we wanted to speak with, which was amazing that we had access. And we're speaking about similar issues up there as well. The way we reach membership, our staff in Washington creates a Washington report every week while Congress is actually in session. There are other services out there. There's one you all may have heard of called Smart Brief. They're popular in the association world. I've used them, and they're great if you don't have your own staff. They're really they do searches on keywords for your issues and bring them in and create what looks like a newsletter. But there's not as much flexibility about actually creating your own news stories about what's happening. So this goes out to 30,000 of our members now. As most of you may know, if you do blast emails, you have to also allow them to unsubscribe. What's nice is out of the 30,000, only about 1,000 have unsubscribed, which we know the open rates of them. We don't know if they read every article. We don't, but at least they know they're getting this and that we have a presence in Washington. The other way, which is not inexpensive, but we have what's called a Legislative Action Center. I'm sure some of you have something like it. So what it is it's really an automated system, and we can pre-populate a letter to Congress. We then email our members and say, please send a letter to Congress on this issue, funding for water. And our staff has already written a letter, which our members are either able to use or edit as they want. And then it's as easy as this. They put in their name, their mailing address, and from that, it knows who their senators and members of Congress are. You hit submit, and it emails each of their offices. And as a reminder, each of us, based on the state you're in, automatically has 2 senators. We each, based on where we live, have 1 House rep, but your state may have a lot of them, and it's based on population. What's neat about this program is by entering your either work or home address, it knows which one is yours. And this has worked extremely well. Any questions about any of what I've spoken about so far? Okay, so we've got a big campaign called Tell Your Story. And I can't stress this enough, but I will. Telling your own personal story, it is what matters. And I speak with my own friends who've just washed their hands of the whole political system and say, you know, my vote doesn't matter, nobody cares, unless I'm one of those dirty lobbyists with boatloads of small unmarked bills, I can't have any influence. I always argue that because I've seen it in action for 30 years. And even as challenging as it is right now in Congress. It still works. If you tell your member of Congress your story, they use that, and it has influence. We held a large meeting every year. One of them is called the North American Snow Conference, and it's exciting. It's about snow and ice removal with big trucks and snow plows. But we had as our speaker the senator from Iowa, and we walked her around our expo floor, and it was a nice meet and greet. And then we had her up on stage. The first words out of her mouth, unprompted, was, "Tell your story. I need your stories. So when I'm fighting for passage of a bill, I can share your story with other senators because they want to know what's actually happening out there." So we've actually established a website where you can video, using your iPhone, or write your story. And we have a whole host of these already, and it's very powerful. We've also started doing some targeted research, because when we meet with members of Congress, House reps and senators, based on what state they're in, we have a state sheet for every state in the United States that lists the 5 largest public works and infrastructure projects. They may know about them, they may not. They get very excited though when you bring them, and it's a great way to start a discussion. Social media is really, really big, especially right now. When I started working at APWA, I was pretty surprised at how much our members actually use Twitter. But if you think about it, that is the way the cities actually communicate with their residents. And so it's a great platform. We use Instagram, Facebook. We have a great social media staff in our Kansas City office, but then our staff in Washington are constantly tweeting news stories about issues of importance, to us. Here's more illustrations. As most of you know, graphics are so important on social media platforms, more than words. And so we make sure we have really great pictures. And there you have Sharice Davids once more, the woman on her right. On the left in the picture is somebody on our board. So that was great having her up there. The other, which is not easy, it is influencing legislation, is being able to write an op-ed in an opinion piece in newspapers. The Hill, some of you may know, is the most widely read newspaper up on Capitol Hill. We were able to have our president write an opinion piece on the importance of spending money on infrastructure. And my alarm ran off. I know I have a couple more minutes, but I'm almost finished apparently. So with that, wow, on time. With that, I'm gonna look at all of you and really would love questions, things that keep you awake at night, things you wanna do to change America or your program. And I probably should look at the chat box too, if anyone. Let's see. Okay, 1 question, 2 questions. I'll come find you. I'll come find you and have you ask me those questions. Well, if nothing else, then I think I am finished.
Hey, Scott.
Yes.
Just a quick question. You mentioned the iPhone way to get people to help tell their stories. Do you share what other people have told as their stories to help give people ideas to tell their story in terms of advocating for the profession and helping to lobby for the organization?
Exactly. Yeah, we have them all up on a website now, so that you can log in and look at other illustrations, either video or written. We also set up a studio at our annual meeting. When we were able to have it, we had to cancel ours this year, which we would have had in August. But yeah, we have a studio there, and we have a staff member who makes, because most people are not that comfortable speaking on camera, but she makes them very comfortable, has questions either prepared ahead of time that they're able to look over, or if they're more comfortable, she'll ask them on the fly. And she also, when that happens, is able to edit them. So we make everyone look great. And for those people at home, they've been doing it on their iPhone or Android and then uploading them. Thanks for the question. Okay, so I think I am finished.
A question in the chat I want to bring attention to real quick.
Thank you.
There's Deb's asking about rules about if I can trip over that word one more time, advocacy. How do we find out what we can and cannot do as an association?
Yeah, great question. And I believe it was Deb Herman earlier who said they have a program at the state level as well. But is that right? Yeah.
Yes, we have a lobby. So about 85% of my job is advocacy.
Are you a 501c6?
Yes, and we do. Have a
I was worried.
Yeah.
Because when I hear 85% of your job, that's not insubstantial.
You should be worried.
No. So here's what's fun, and here's why when I spoke about earlier, we don't put as much of our resource in state. It is because every state has its own rules. So when you're speaking about rules about advocacy, every state has its own rules. Federal, it's well established based on whether you're a 501c3 or 501c6. One of my slides shows that you can, both a 501c3 and 6 can lobby on legislative issues. So you can lobby on bills. You can do grassroots lobbying on federal bills as well. And that would mean you send letters out to your membership and say, here's a bill, S 1418, that we need your help. Please send your members of Congress letters. That's what would be called grassroots lobbying. Based on whether it's direct lobbying or grassroots lobbying, we as registered lobbyists at the federal level must report on it. And they give you a whole list of what you must report. So to go deeper in that, for instance, when we must show the IRS as a 501c3 that we're lobbying an insubstantial amount, we have our lobbyists record the hours, the minutes that they've direct lobby, grassroots lobby, or indirect lobbying, which is preparation, research, random meetings on the Hill. And we also include rent, salaries, and any related overhead. So it's pretty complex, but we have a lock. From the state standpoint, so I got annoyed at some state rule, and I got registered in the state of Florida, and which was easy. And one of my federal lobbyists and he got registered as well. We had a hot issue, and we had to learn what those rules were. But every state has different rules. Does that answer your question? And I don't know what all the rules are. Yeah.
going deeper into that. The only state I represent is Missouri, so it's simple that I only have one state rules. But where do I educate myself of those rules? For instance, when we are doing direct lobbying, one of the members emailed the representative and got reprimanded for emailing the representative at their lobbying address, their representative address, and talked about a check because we have contributions that we make from our PAC. I don't think they should have got reprimanded, but how can we familiarize ourselves with our state rules? Like, what resource do I get those from?
Yeah, so that's great. One quick question: who reprimanded the
A staff member, but I think that it was incorrect. Yeah.
I think so too. So online, the state legislature's web pages have rules up there. There should also be the Missouri, let's see, it's going to be the state legislative. There is a nonprofit group that handles state legislative rules. I can find that and email you that.
Oh, so
and
there
they
is
would have that up there too.
That for the state of Missouri that makes those rules. Okay, yeah, because if I could educate myself, then I could tell that staff person that we were within our rights.
Yeah, no, the state legislature would make the rules, but the nonprofit has a great website that shows you what those rules are. Some states make them very obscure and hard to find, which it sounds like is happening here almost on purpose. There are some states that create their structure in a way that it really makes it hard to gain access. But your member, for instance, he's a constituent, or even if he's not, he lives in the state. She has every right of reaching out. When we're speaking about writing a check, that might be different. There are, in most states, and definitely at the federal level, there's separate staff and separate ways of handling campaign interaction from legislative action. And that might have been an issue there. So like if I'm in Washington and I'm meeting with a member of Congress about our issues, water, roads, bridges, and then at the end of our discussion, since I know he's mine at home, if I in that meeting said, hey, I'll write you a check for $50, I know you're running, I would be in total violation. You have to keep that separate. So
that's what I need to learn. Yeah, that's exactly what I need. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have my email? Well, I had that as a slide. If you email me, I'll
It was only
I'll
up a
email you that.
second.
So it's Grayson, SGRAYSON at APWA.net.
Perfect.
And if anyone else online here has questions about that, please reach out. And if I don't know the answer, I'll make it up.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Scott.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Scott, you got one more question in the chat you can answer.
Well, it's 1 minute over. I don't want to use your time.
I yield the
You're
floor.
yielding it?
I yield the floor to the gentleman from APWA.
So what is the most beneficial thing you did to prepare and excel in your role? So do you mean my role as CEO or my role in working with government affairs? And that's
Working
Jessica,
with government affairs.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, you're right there on my screen. I see you. And you have great mountains in the background.
Sedona, Arizona.
Oh, I love that. So it's a great question. You learn a lot on the fly. There are the rules you have to learn, and that you can look up. To be a lobbyist, it's really about having people skills and being able to read your audience. The last job I worked at a nonprofit called APWA. It's the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. It has 500,000 members worldwide, 1,200 staff, huge. But I work with electrical engineers. And when I would bring them up on the Hill, by and large, they have no social skills. And they'd start launching into technical speak. And you could see the member of Congress and the Hill staff, their eyes are just glazed over. And I'm constantly watching the room and the experience. So like right now, Zoom is harder for me because I don't know absolutely if you've fallen asleep yet, but you know, if you had, I'd probably stop. But you know, and then I step in and say, okay, what he means is, and put it in very easy language. But so there's that. The other key thing I learned in a congressional quarterly workshop when I was 27 years old and starting out in this was be able to state your issue in one line or less, you know, one line or less, because that's all you might ever have. And that actually happened with me once. I had a meeting with Senator Hatch, and I used to lobby on intellectual property. That's copyright law, patent law. And we needed some language removed out of a Copyright Rental Act for software. And somehow I got a meeting with Orrin Hatch, and he was on his way to the floor to actually vote on it. Walked in, he said, "What do you got?" And I stated it in one line. He said, "Thank you." He walked out. He removed the language. So my favorite story, but it's so important, starting with one line and reading your audience and then seeing if they want more. And then really a lot of the other slides I showed is just being tenacious and patient. Legislation moves slowly, and building relationships, whether it's at the state legislature, whether it's in Congress, and always remembering they work for us, right? So they might be big and important and scary to some, but they're people like you and me, and they work for us. The other part I didn't say was I have held elected office. I was a council member where I lived, and that really gave me a great perspective about the part about they work for us. I felt like I was a servant of the people, and that's really important. So I would leave you with have hope about what's happening out there. A lot of people are hopeless about it. I love the process and think each one of us and each one of our associations are able to play a huge role.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Mike.
Thank you, Scott. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Crystal.
And if anybody has any other questions for Scott, I did provide his email in the chat, so I'm sure he would be open if you needed to reach out to him offline. Without further ado, I'd like to jump right into our next speaker. Mr. Mike Chamberlain is going to talk to us this morning about leadership. He's done this presentation for us quite a few years in a row and has received really high remarks. So this is going to be a great presentation. Mike is a past president of KCSAE, and he is also the executive director for the Grant Professionals Association. Mike?
Thank you, Crystal. And let me make sure that I'm hitting the right buttons here. All right. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for taking the time. Thank your boss for allowing you to be part of KCSAE's AM 101. I think this is a great opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about the association world and the community that we are. So as Crystal said, I am just a little bit more about me. As Crystal mentioned, I am the CEO of the Grant Professionals Association, also been engaged and involved in KCSAE for a number of years. You might notice there's a little icon or a little logo on this slide. I did get my start in the quick service restaurant industry. So those of you who wonder where you get your start to be an association CEO, you start by flipping burgers. Oh, wait, no, that's something else. So anyhow, just a little bit about me and some of my background. I also belong to a couple of associations, so I'm all in on the association community and world. So with that in mind, we're going to try a little bit of an experiment here. I'm going to switch from what is my normal presentation technology to a different one. So we're going to hang on a second as we transport over time into a new technology. Hold on. Hey, and there we're there. So let's talk about leadership. And one of the things that I'm going to have you do is you see at the top there, it says go to www.menti.com and use that code. We're not going to do that quite yet. We'll do that on the next slide, but you will need to open another window or have this available on your phone. So we're going to do a little bit interactive activity here today. So really what we're going to talk about today is leadership and management and what the difference is between those two things and how they apply within the association world and within the association community. So one of the things that I always talk about in this is that both are skills that you need at any point in your career. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So first question. So this is where you go to menti.com and use the code 795819 and just enter what are the characteristics of an effective leader. So we'll give you about a minute to do that. There we go. So these are some great phrases and words. Excellent. So let this word cloud kind of finish building up. But you can see in there, people have all kinds of opinions about what a leader is, but I think it's interesting to note a couple of the key ones that are the big ones: decisive, compassionate, and professional. You know, those are things that as we look to our leaders and we look to people who are leaders both in our society and our organizations, what are the things that we're looking for in them? Again, they're empathetic. And empathy and compassion sometimes go hand in hand. I like that people are strategic and that they're passionate, trustworthy. Some great terms that apply to leaders and how leaders go about doing and serving in their role as a leader in their organization. And think about this. These are characteristics that you have identified, and think about that in terms of how you think about leaders, not only for your organization in terms of the volunteer leaders, but also the staff leaders. So let's talk about management then, and what the other side of the coin is in terms of management. And that's more about what people call the day-to-day, the kind of icky stuff. You know, well, I gotta take care of management. I gotta manage my people. I gotta manage things. So we're gonna do the same exercise here. So talk about what are the characteristics of an effective manager. So again, we'll give you about a minute to enter some of those codes or some of those characteristics that you think would be a effective manager. Great stuff. And it's interesting, as you'll note, that there's some things that are overlapping, and then there's some things that are not overlapping at all between management and leadership. So one of the things that I'll point out that I think is interesting is that communicates clearly and trustworthy came out as two of the big ones for effective managers. I think those are probably also effective tools for leaders as well, the need to communicate clearly and be trustworthy. But then there's some other things, you know, for example, outcomes-based, coaching, delegating, and task-oriented, a lot of things like that that end up being the things that managers have to do in their role to be successful. So thank you for sharing those ideas and sharing those characteristics, because I think that's an important piece of this, is understanding as we look at both leadership and management, what are those characteristics, not only from your perspective, but from others' perspective, and what are they looking at to say, here's what I'm looking at and here's who I think I am. So, all right. So one of my all-time favorite people is Peter Drucker. Who's, for those of you who don't know Peter Drucker, he was kind of a management guru, wrote numerous books on leadership and management. And I really love this quote because I think this really kind of sets the table for what the difference is between leadership and management. And again, management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. And so we talked a little, you saw that in some of the characteristics of things in terms of where people are in looking at the characteristics. So the leadership is about that vision, about getting people on the right path. Management, on the other hand, as you mentioned, we're task-oriented, coaching, those kind of things, making sure that we're doing things right. Another example of this that I've heard used is management is effectively climbing the ladder. Leadership is making sure the ladder's on the right wall. So as we think about that and we look towards that in terms of management and leadership in associations, we're going to think about that in terms of not only who sets the direction and the vision, but how does that direction and vision get executed? How do we make sure those things happen? So one last quote, you'll notice that I used a number of presidents in my presentation because they are people that end up at the end of the day having to do both leadership and management. So this, I really enjoy, I like this quote from Harry Truman. In terms of, from a leadership perspective, it really does make a difference in terms of the accomplishments you can make, especially if you don't care who gets credit. It's amazing what work gets done by large groups of people led by effective leaders in that regard. So let's take it from kind of the general management and leadership sense down into the specifics of the association world. Oh, sorry. I had a quiz for you first. Sorry, I forgot about my quiz. All right, so quiz time. So how many of you consider yourselves managers? So again, go to menti.com and use the code 795819. And I'm going to start the quiz here. So two, one. All right, time's up. Well, I'll give you the right answer. It's yes and maybe. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But just think about this in terms of one of the things that we talked about, that you showed in the characteristics, task-oriented, getting things done. If you're not managing yourself, you're not doing those things. So in one way, you can be considered a manager.
Oh, Jesus.
So we're going to zoom right along. So now let's talk a little bit more about the association world. ASAE, the American Society of Association Executives, has done a lot of research on what makes the difference in leadership and management in associations. So as we look at association CEOs, there's really 4 kind of areas that we talk about. And they're up on the screen there for you. But recognizing that these are coming from different areas. So let me start with collaborative. For leaders for association executives, for association professionals, the collaboration comes in multiple factors. So first of all, as Scott mentioned earlier, it's about your membership and collaborating with those memberships and collaborating with outside organizations. So collaboration in a collaborative model is an important piece of things. And you're working for a constituency. It's their association. You know, one of the things that's kind of unique about associations is our stakeholders are our members. And so it's their association and it's their responsibility to make sure that we move in the right direction. But as association management professionals, we can help them along that way. So there's also collaboration between staff and leadership and the volunteers. Depending on how your organization is structured, that may be the board of directors, it may be committees, it may be task forces, it may just be a volunteer work group that's working on a particular project. So there's a lot of levels of collaboration that happen between between the association and its members and its staff. So that then kind of moves us into the second area, which is innovative. And so from an association perspective, innovation happens at all levels. Again, there's innovation from the staff, there's innovation from the volunteers. And so managing that process and leading that process, and they are 2 separate things, but in the role of an association executive is an important element of that is making sure that innovation is happening and that you're allowing it to continue to grow. So sometimes that means leading the association in an area where the members don't see that they need to be there yet. And sometimes that happens because of your role in terms of being an association executive and researching and being involved and engaged with the association in the outside world. And sometimes that's from leadership within the organization. Oftentimes the board can be ahead of the rest of the organization. So there becomes that need to be a true leader for the organization and to lead the membership to a place where they need to be, that they just don't recognize that they need to be there yet. The third area is unhindered. And by that means the association staff leaders have a great deal of flexibility within a structured environment. Especially as an association CEO, there's nobody, well, there is somebody telling you what to do, and it's the board, but you report to the board. And in many organizations, as I mentioned before, it's that collaborative arrangement that's an element, that's an important piece of things that in terms of how you work together and how you lead the organization. So from an association leadership perspective, you're going to be working very closely with the board to develop that strategic plan, that structure, that vision of where you're going. But at the same time, the association and professional has to translate that and get that information out to their staff and help lead the staff to support the vision of the organization. So depending on the size of the organization, you may also be the only leadership or leadership advice for the organization. And so the opportunity there is great for you to provide that leadership to the board, but also leadership to the staff. And as a part of that then is the whole concept of management. So that kind of leads us back in, leads me into the fourth one, which is self-directed. And in that regard, many of our associations are led by volunteers. So they are the board members who are volunteers who work in the profession or work in the trade, and their job is to do their job. And working on the board is a volunteer opportunity for them. It's a volunteer service for them. And so they're doing this on top of their day job, on top of their family life, on top of their other activities. And so oftentimes the association professional, the association executive is self-directed. So they're going to have to manage themselves. They're going to have to be able to lead themselves and help manage both their workload and the workload of their staff. So, depending on your relation, and it can also depend on your relationship with your board and your board chair, as many CEOs will tell you, and especially that unique relationship that happens over time. I don't want to go too far into governance, but one of the things that's kind of unique about associations is that for most organizations, for most associations, your board turns over on a pretty regular basis. And so from a leadership and management perspective, for an association CEO, you're constantly managing your board, but also constantly leading your board and working with them to understand how you can be collaborative, how you can be innovative, and how you can move the association forward. So there's a lot of pieces in that in terms of leadership and management come together in your role as an association professional and as association executive. So one of the things that I like to talk about is how you can take a leadership role in your organization. So I mentioned earlier that the correct answer to that question earlier was yes or maybe in terms of, are you a manager? So how do you take a leadership role or a management role in your organization? So one of the ways you can do that is be involved in leading a peer team. So depending on the size of your organization, you might be involved in being the lead on a project where you become the person who not only provides leadership to that team, but then also works as a manager with your peers, to manage your peers in terms of the work that they're doing to accomplish this goal. You can lead volunteers. Many organizations have staff who work with committees or work with a task force or a task group to help serve the members and to help meet specific member needs. So that's an opportunity for you to work with your volunteers, get engaged with your volunteers, and build your skills in leadership and working with people. As Scott mentioned earlier, that opportunity to work with people and get to know how people work, and especially getting to know your members. I think that's one of the things that is, for me, one of the greatest things about association, the association community, is you get the opportunity to meet people and learn more about them and what their role is and the work that they're doing to support their community, to support their organizations. And so that gives us the opportunity to both lead and manage at the same time with those volunteer groups. And so then in addition to that, you have to be willing to step into a leadership role when necessary. There's a story by Abraham Lincoln from the Civil War, where a particular, it was a teamster, a driver of a team of horses, was known to curse a lot, and his colonel told him that he needed to stop doing that. And soon enough, the team got stuck in a rut. He was getting frustrated and finally just let loose of a string of curse words. Colonel came and was berating him and said, I told you you weren't supposed to curse. Why did you curse? And the enlisted man said, well, the cursing needed to be done and you weren't there to do it, so somebody had to step in and lead. So sometimes the opportunity is there that you end up in that role to lead the organization or lead a particular project or process. So sometimes you've got to be willing to step in to lead and step in to be a part of that leadership team for your organization. So what does that mean for you as an association professional? You may look around and say, well, I'm new at this organization. How can I be involved in leadership? How can I manage somebody? Well, the first thing I tell you to do is look for opportunities. Sometimes those opportunities are going to be within your organization. Sometimes they're going to be outside your organization. So for example, and I'll put in my little plug here for KCSAE, there's always opportunity to volunteer with KCSAE. And when you volunteer with the association, there's that opportunity that you may work in a leadership role. And so that's an opportunity for you to build your skills, learn from others, learn from your peers, learn from others in the association field. Look within your own association, ask for those opportunities to volunteer to lead a special project, to work with a committee or a task force or an association profession or the association community. Look for those opportunities within your organization. That's the opportunity for you to build your skill set, to build those tools that will serve you in the long run, whether it's managing an individual project or becoming the team lead for something, or again, advancing in your career if that's the direction you want to go, to have the opportunity to lead a project or lead an organization or association. And finally, I'd mention the opportunity to engage a mentor. Whether it's in your organization or outside of your organization, look for those opportunities to engage with somebody who can help you identify skills that you have and the skills that you need to grow to continue to be and advance in your career. So with that, let's see how this worked. I will open it up for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing now. Let's see what questions we have. So open to questions. I know I ran a little short. That's why I gave Scott some extra time, because I knew I'd run a little short. So what questions do you have for me about leadership and management?
Mike, I have one. What's the best way to approach, let's say you know that you've made the choice that you want to move up and you are looking at a leadership role as a staff person. How do you approach your manager or the person who's you're reporting to so that they're not taken aback or offended by or get defensive about the fact that you want to move up in your association?
Great question, Curtis. And I think the first piece of that, in terms of approaching your manager and supervisor, and I failed to mention this, I think this is one of those key elements of management that people kind of lose track of. There's really, in my mind, 4 ways to manage. You can manage down, which is the typical, supervisor managing his or her people underneath her. There's managing yourself. There's managing sideways, so managing your peers, working with your peers. And then there's managing up, which is managing your relationship with your boss or your supervisor. And so I think one of the important pieces of that is understanding what their needs are and looking and saying, what are their needs and expectations as a leader and a manager? So sometimes that opportunity comes in terms of asking them, what are the projects? What are the things that you're working on that I can help you with? How can I help with you as in your role to advance the organization? And one of the things that shows to most people is the willingness to serve and the willingness to lead something. And that then plays down the road when that opportunity comes up for advancement to show that you've demonstrated a skill there, you've demonstrated the willingness to step into a role and the willingness to manage something and learn from that process. I have my own opinion about leaders who are threatened by people who want to do more. I kind of think those are people who, well, I'm not going to go directly down that road, but what I will say is this. I've always hoped that I hire people smarter than me because I can learn from them. And I want to be able to, I want to be able to have them help me advance the organization. How can we get, the example for me is for our organization, we're trying to push a rock. And so for my role as a leader is to make sure we're all on the same side of the rock, pushing together at the same time so we can actually get it moving in the right direction. And so if we're not doing that, if we're all on different sides of the rock pushing at the same time, we're not going to make any progress there. So my role as a leader is not to say that I know everything, but to work with people and help them and raise their game. And that's really what I want to do as a leader is I want to make sure that I'm raising the game of everybody around me. So
I think I've got one.
Yes, Scott.
Am I unmuted? Yeah. So I've got two questions, maybe. One is, what are your thoughts about the qualities of a leader to be mindful and self-aware?
Oh, I think those are critical. The self-awareness piece, and I'll throw into that, know what your strengths are and know what your weaknesses are. And understanding your weaknesses can be one of the greatest things you know, because one of the things for me is if I know what my weaknesses are, I can find people who have strengths in that area, who can help me and help the organization grow. And so, that's one of the things that for some people, they think the leader knows absolutely everything. And I would argue that good leaders and good managers recognize and are self-aware and recognize what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are and how they can use those things to work with their team to grow things.
Thanks. The other question I often think about is whether leadership transcends generational differences. And what I mean is, we read a lot about that, and I've been slapped on the wrist by my own staff who says, stop speaking about millennials and how we are and all that stuff, and pigeonholing, and that's fair. But I noticed there is a difference in generations. When I started working, I had an older boss who was the leader who would walk the hallways and make sure you were working. He'd yell at people. He'd make you cry in staff meetings. That was kind of the old style. We're in an era. I recall that one of our newer and younger staff members, I walked in the lunchroom and said, "Who are you and what is your job?" And I thought that was amazing that that person asked it. If I would have asked my old leader, he might have fired me. And I could see the other people in the lunchroom who were of an older generation, either Xers or Boomers, turn white. Like, why is this person asking him that? But my point is, it's refreshing. And I think the question is, do you as a leader need to adjust, be nimble, be agile to changing demographics and age?
I'm going to answer that a yes and no. And here's why that I would say that. I think there's one of the things that the School of Management goes back many, many years. And we've moved from the idea of for the most part, we've moved from the idea of the production line worker to the knowledge worker. And I would say probably 90% of the people in this program are what would be considered knowledge workers. You're not putting bolts on, you're not putting nuts on a bolt. You're thinking about things, you're putting a project together. And so the management style of how many widgets did you make this hour? And that old school, we're going to keep cranking out stuff. I think we've started to finally see a shift in terms of the recognition that people don't work that way anymore. And I would say, especially over the last 4 months, we've seen that completely get turned on its head because people have been sent home to say, go work from home and produce what you're going to produce and make sure you're meeting the deadlines.
Right.
So that Scott, to your point about your old school boss, my guess is part of that wandering around was to say, what's on your computer screen or what's on your desk? What are you working on? In that constant monitoring to say, it better be work, it better be work, it better be work. And I think two things. One, we've moved away from that, and technology's helped us with that to a degree. but on kind of the flip side of that, technology can kind of hurt us in that regard because the phone is always on, or my tablet always has my emails popping up on it. And so how do we manage that from a personal perspective? But then how do we also figure out how to manage that, and how do you lead people in that regard? And how do you make sure that people, from a management perspective, how do you make sure that people do a good enough job of self-care so that they're not burning themselves out? And so I think we're moving into a new era where the knowledge worker piece is so important, but then there's going to be the different side of this is in terms of managing people's expectations and managing people in a different way. It's not 9 to 5 anymore. It's not 8 to 6 anymore. It's, I did X amount of work today, and maybe I did that from 4 a.m. to noon, or maybe I did it, from 6 to 10 at night. And so there's a lot of different challenges with that from a leadership and management perspective. But I think what we're seeing is that and I would argue some of this is age related, but some of it is the way that organizations have moved to change their models of how they're delivering and what they're delivering from a productivity standpoint. Do we still need people that are, doing that hourly work, that hourly production work? Absolutely. There's certain things that are going to be that way. But I think for associations, there's so many more of them that are really converting to the knowledge management perspective. So,
thanks.
Sure. So a couple questions in the chat. So what has been one of your most impactful leadership roles, and what were some of the things you learned about leadership and management in that role? So one of the things, let me go back to my very first job. It wasn't a leadership role, but I will say I have learned more from my bad bosses than I did from my good bosses. I will just share that, both from a leadership and a management perspective. I learned so much about what to do and what not to do in that regard. One of the things that, and thank you, and I lost track of who it was. Thank you for Deb for recognizing my Eagle Scout. I will say that was one of my early leadership experiences. Was being a leader in that role and learning in that environment. But, one of the things that I've learned over time, and it is about self-awareness, but it's also about being able to flex your style. So from a leadership perspective, obviously there's figuring out what the vision is, but then figuring out how do I work with people? And that fits with both leadership and management. So from a leadership perspective, how do I help people understand the vision of what I see and where I think things are going? And then from the management side, how do I make sure that we keep track of those task-oriented things? How do we keep track of those things that need to get done so that we stay on top of the tasks? So, from a couple things that I've learned from that is that if you treat people right, they'll do the right thing. I'm as my staff hopefully will tell you, I'm a big believer in people, that they're going to do the right thing, and that it requires some coaching sometimes and interaction, but you got to keep the lines of communication open. And so that to me is one of those things that you have to continue to build on, is continue to build your communication skills, and recognize that that's an important element to that. I think the other piece, and we kind of alluded to it earlier, in terms of one of the leadership lessons that I've learned is I don't know everything. And so I've got to rely on others to help me with that. I know a lot of things, and I know a lot of worthless things, little trivia things too, but there's also a lot of things that I don't know. So I'll use this as my particular example. I work for the Grant Professionals Association. I know what a grant is. I know what's involved in it, but you do not want me writing a grant proposal for your organization or managing your grant funds. That's not my job. That's not an area of my expertise. So when it comes time to that, that's where I'm going to reach out to content experts, and that's where I'm going to reach out to people that know what they know that stuff to develop on that. I'm going to leap off of that to another question, which is there such a thing as a meaningless experience? I would say it's only meaningless if you make it meaningless. As I mentioned, some of the best things I've learned is from my bad bosses. That is as frustrating as they were, and I don't think it was meaningless, but I learned from that. And it's what lessons do you take from that? What things do you, how do you decide that you're going to act differently? And so for me, whether it's learning from a good boss or learning from a bad boss, learning from a good leader, learning from bad leaders, it's the opportunity, and and not to go too political here, but look at some of the leaders that we've seen in the last 3 months, in the last 3 weeks even. Think about the people there that have stood up and have communicated clearly, that are showing leadership and being respected by their peers, and some of the characteristics we talked about earlier that are showing that they're trustworthy. Those are things that as you go through your experiences, you can recognize and hopefully learn from and grow in your own skills. And to me, that's one of those things that it's the opportunity to learn from those experiences, and how do you learn from them, and what do you take away from them, and what are those things that really help you to build your skills going forward. All right. Other questions? Well, if not
see any in the chat.
Okay. So
Mike, would you mind typing in your email address in the chat for everyone? And that way, if anybody thinks of any questions offline, if you're open to it, they can reach out to you.
I am absolutely always open to that. You'll learn to type, though. That's the problem. So that's my email address. So I do want to share just a couple quick things with you before I wrap up. As I was mentioning, leadership and management, especially as you advance in your career, it requires a level of balance. The skill sets that you're going to use, the leadership skills and the management skills, are going to have to be balanced throughout your day. And so whether that's leading a volunteer group or managing a volunteer group, you're going to use both of those skill sets as you go throughout your day and throughout your life experiences. And again, whether that's a project, a volunteer group, or a staff group, you want to make sure you have and maintain that balance. So this next slide is included in the presentation materials, I think. And now my slide doesn't want to work. So anyway, oh, there we go. This information is included in the last slide on the presentations that are in the Dropbox. You're using Dropbox, right? But just some additional resources that you might want to look into. I'm a big fan of Abraham Lincoln, so I've read a lot of books on him. The Lincoln on Leadership is actually a pretty short book, but it's a really good one. But again, take a look at these, and as Crystal said, I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you might have that you think of later on. So happy to be here with you today. Thank you for taking time to be here. Thank you for being a part of KCSAE, and welcome to the association world.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Mike. Thanks for wrapping up week 3 of this 4-week series that we've got. Just a reminder, we're on for our 4th and final week next week, which is going to be on June 30th. 2 presentations. Mike will be back with us again next week to talk about non-dues revenue. And then we will finish out our series with a panel discussion. We have 3 panelists that are going to talk to us about membership and technology. So again, if you guys have any questions that you want the panelists to kind of prepare ahead of time, please send those my way. It could be anything related to technology questions now that we're in this new virtual environment, or any questions about membership, maybe something about membership engagement, you know, from this more virtual aspect as we're not really able to see each other right now. Anything that you might have, feel free to send that over to me. Probably by Wednesday of this week would be really helpful. Otherwise, we plan on seeing you all next Tuesday at 9 o'clock in the morning. Take care. Have a great week.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
We'll see you then.
Thank you.
Bye.
Heather?
Yes.
Before we hang up, since I should probably stop the recording here.
Yep. I don't
Okay,
have.
I'm going to stop. I know.